My parents banned me from my sister's wedding like I was nothing to them. I had been sitting at my kitchen counter in San Diego sunlight streaking through the blinds when the email from my mother appeared. Only 7 words glared back at me. "It's Hannah's day. Don't make it harder." My breath stalled in my chest. I dropped my phone, the thud echoing too loud in the quiet apartment. For a long moment I couldn't move. The walls, painted in warm cream, suddenly felt like they were closing in. Out of instinct, I reached for the screen again, thinking maybe I'd misread, maybe there was more hidden in the thread. But no, just one short sentence that erased me from an entire chapter of my family's story. When I opened Instagram to distract myself, the first post on my feed knocked the air from me again. Aunt Margaret had tagged Hannah in a photo, my little sister, standing in a lace gown under golden string, lights our mother's hand clasped tightly in hers. They both beamed, faces glowing as if the world finally matched their dreams. Behind them, flowers spilled across polished floors. Relatives I hadn't seen in years smiled like actors in a scene I'd never been invited to. My name wasn't anywhere, not in the tags, not in the captions, not even as an afterthought. It was as though I had never existed. I stared at Hannah's face on that screen until my vision blurred. Memories stormed in me, signing checks for her tuition at Texas State, wiring money so she wouldn't get evicted from her apartment in Dallas, canceling job interviews, just so I could drive her across town when she had panic attacks. I had been her anchor, her fixer, her silent partner in survival. And now, on her biggest day, I was not just forgotten, I was deliberately erased. The apartment clock ticked toward evening, but I couldn't pull myself away from the counter. I felt betrayal burn slow and deep, a familiar ache, layered over years of being overlooked. I thought of every time my parents chose Hannah's comfort over my achievements. Ballet recitals with bouquets stacked in her arms while my debate trophies gathered dust on a lonely shelf in the hallway. Thanksgiving dinners where her delicate temperament excused every misstep, and my hard-earned promotions were brushed aside as if they embarrassed the family. I swallowed hard and called my mother. The phone rang twice before her voice came through, clipped and tense. "Emma, please. Hannah needs peace. Don't make this about you." The words landed like cold steel. My hand shook against the phone. "So, you're banning me from her wedding?" I asked, voice breaking despite my best effort. Her silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then quietly, "It's Hannah's day." And she hung up. I set the phone down gently, almost afraid the weight of it would shatter me. Around me, my apartment looked exactly the same: sunflowers in a vase by the sink, the navy cocktail dress I'd planned to wear to Hannah's wedding hanging in the corner, still wrapped in plastic. But inside, something had broken. I poured a glass of wine, though it tasted like dust on my tongue. Staring out over the twinkling San Diego skyline, I felt like a ghost haunting a life I had built, but was never allowed to claim. My chest ached with injustice. Wasn't it enough that I had carried them through medical bills, credit card debt, the endless chaos Hannah created and abandoned? Wasn't it enough that I had spent years proving I was responsible, capable, strong? The answer echoed back in my chaos. Mother's voice. "You don't matter if it makes Hannah uncomfortable." I laughed, then sharp, bitter, half a sob. It wasn't humor, but a reflex to keep from falling apart. My whole life, I had been cast as the strong one, the independent one, the one who could handle herself. And maybe that was why this ban wasn't a surprise. It was just the first time they admitted in plain language that my place in their family had never been secure. I slid down to the floor, back against the cabinet's glass, trembling in my hands. My father's voice surfaced in memory, distant, dismissive. "Emma can handle herself." He'd say it over the rustle of his newspaper, over the sip of his scotch, like a refrain that absolved him from noticing me. And now that same refrain justified my exile. When the tears finally came, they weren't loud. They slipped down my cheeks in silence, like water leaking from a crack too long ignored. The hours blurred. At some point, I walked into my bedroom and stood in front of the cocktail dress. Navy blue, elegant, understated, just like me. It was supposed to be my way of showing up quietly but beautifully, the supportive older sister who never made a scene. Now it mocked me. I unzipped the garment bag, touched the smooth fabric, then let it slip back into place. I couldn't throw it away yet, not because I still hoped to wear it, but because part of me needed proof that my exclusion wasn't a nightmare I had made up. The sky turned violet outside. I sat at the edge of my bed, my thoughts circling like vultures. If they could erase me from this moment, what else had they already erased? How many times had I disappeared just to make their lives easier? The front door clicked open. Daniel stepped in, still in his suit, from a late meeting tie loosened. He paused when he saw me sitting in the dim light, my phone face down on the counter, the untouched wine glass beside it. His eyes softened. "What happened?" he asked, voice low. "They banned me," I whispered. "From Hannah's wedding, my own parents. They said I'd make it harder." He set his briefcase down and walked over, kneeling in front of me. "Emma," he said steady, "do you want to keep knocking on a locked door? Or do you want to build your own?" The question hit me harder than the email had. For years I had begged for scraps of approval, knocking on doors that were never meant to open for me. My parents' table was set for one daughter only, and I was never the chosen guest. I looked at Daniel, at the quiet certainty in his eyes. For the first time that day I felt something other than grief. A flicker of choice. A seed of freedom. Maybe revenge didn't have to be loud or cruel. Maybe it could look like stepping onto a horizon they couldn't control. Maybe it could look like me. On my 30th birthday, I sat alone at a table, set for 3 in a small Italian restaurant, tucked into a corner of West Broadway, staring at the flickering candle as if its flame might answer for my parents' absence. I had called them a week earlier, careful to give them time, careful not to demand too much. Mom had sounded distracted. Dad mumbled something about a doctor's appointment, but they hadn't said no. I wanted to believe that meant yes. By 6:30, I had ordered a bottle of red, the kind Dad liked, hoping the waiter would see 3 glasses on the table and not assume I was pathetic. At 6:45, I was still holding the menu, pretending to be engrossed in the pasta descriptions I knew by heart. The waiter glanced at me with that mixture of pity and impatience I hated. I texted, "Mom, are you close?" The bubble appeared for a second, then disappeared. No reply. When I finally gave in and opened Instagram, the truth landed like a blade. There was Hannah laughing in a sunlit vineyard in Napa, a glass of rosé in hand. Mom and Dad stood beside her, arms draped around her shoulders. The caption read "Weekend with the fam." The word fam twisted in my chest like a cruel joke. I was their daughter too, wasn't I? But the image told a different story. I sat there in my black dress, the one I'd bought just for the occasion, and swallowed down 3 glasses of wine while couples celebrated anniversaries around me. I walked home through San Diego's glowing streets, with the taste of betrayal bitterer than the alcohol. That night, sitting on my couch, I remembered the first time favoritism carved its shape into my bones. Hannah was 9, I was 13, and we both had important events on the same Saturday. She had a ballet recital at the community center. I had the final round of the state debate championship. Mom brought roses, Dad brought a camcorder, and they both went to her recital. No one came to mine. I won first place and brought home a trophy nearly half my size. It sat for years on the hallway shelf, gathering dust until the metal tarnished. Hannah's ribbons and costumes, meanwhile, filled shadow boxes on the living room wall. Mom always said Hannah had a delicate temperament, that she needed encouragement flowers, attention. I was strong, independent, resilient. They told me it was a compliment, but it was really permission to neglect me. By the time high school ended, I had stopped asking for anything. I filled out my own FAFSA forms, hunted down scholarships, found a part-time job shelving books at the library. When Hannah panicked about her college applications, I stayed up until 2 in the morning writing her essays, my fingers cramping on the keyboard while she texted from a friend's car, half drunk and careless. She got into Texas State. I got into UCLA. Our parents visited her 3 times during her freshman year. They came to my graduation once late, carrying a card with $20 tucked inside. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was too strong to need anyone. But the truth is, the forgetting was never the worst part. It was the consistency. In my 20s, I built a career in real estate investment. Long days, sharper nights, negotiations in glass towers that left me breathless but proud. I bought my own condo near the waterfront, filled it with furniture. I paid every bill on time. Yet when I flew back to Houston for Thanksgiving or Christmas, I was treated like a stranger in my own bloodline. My mother asked about Hannah's latest relationship, my father bragged about her internship, and no one asked me how I'd managed to buy a property before 30. They called me lonely career woman when they thought I wasn't listening. They praised Hannah as if she were porcelain to be protected, while I was granite to be leaned on until worn smooth. I thought my 30th birthday might change that. A milestone, something undeniable. But the empty chairs that night proved the truth. I had been avoiding. I wasn't just overlooked. I was excluded. I remember sitting on my sofa after leaving the restaurant, scrolling back through old photos of Hannah's birthday 2 years earlier. They had rented out a small event space, strung up fairy lights, even hired a guitarist. Mom wore her pearls. Dad gave a toast. Hannah posed next to a towering cake and giant silver 28 balloons, her grin radiant. I stared until my eyes blurred. I shut the album, set down my phone, and let the silence press against me. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I just let the quiet hollow me out, because deep down I knew this was never about one night. It was about the pattern, the erasure that started when I was 10 and never stopped. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, half hoping for an apology. Instead, it was another post from Hannah, a boomerang of her swirling a glass of wine at that vineyard, the caption, "Nothing better than family." The next morning, I stood at my window, watching the San Diego sun rise over the harbor. My reflection stared back at me, tired, hollow-eyed, but resolved. Something shifted inside. If they could erase me from a birthday, a holiday, even a graduation, it was only a matter of time before they erased me completely. And then, as if the universe wanted to make the message clearer, another email arrived. It was from the wedding planner coordinating Hannah's event in Dallas. A final guest list attached. Out of reflex, I scrolled through it. Names of cousins, uncles, family friends, even old neighbors I hadn't thought about in years. But not mine. Not in print, not in pencil, not even as an afterthought. I sat down hard on the couch, heart hammering. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had written me out on purpose. The city outside bustled with traffic and noise, but inside my apartment, silence pooled around me like a verdict. My mother's words from the night before echoed, "It's Hannah's day. Don't make it harder." I looked at the unopened cocktail dress still hanging on the closet door and finally admitted to myself it had never been my family's day to include me. It had always been Hannah's world, and I was expected to orbit quietly unseen. But that morning something in me shifted again. For once I didn't feel small. I felt awake. If they were willing to banish me so completely, then maybe it was time I stopped begging for a seat at their table. Maybe it was time to build my own. The first time I realized my parents could lie by omission, I was 10 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway with a charcoal drawing clutched in my hands. Hannah lay curled on the couch with a fever, our mother sitting beside her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. I had spent all night shading the picture, my fingers blackened, my shirt torn from leaning too close to the desk. I waited for Mom to notice, to ask to look at me. She never did. She only said, "Emma, get your sister some ginger tea." That memory burned through me as I scrolled down Aunt Margaret's Instagram, seeing picture after picture of Hannah in her bridal gown. The way Mom's eyes glowed at her, the way Dad actually smiled for once, it was a highlight reel of devotion I had never tasted. A lump rose in my throat, heavier than anger. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about every moment that had led to this one. By the time I was 15, I had stopped expecting applause. When I brought home a ribbon from debate, it sat untouched on the hallway shelf while Hannah's dance costumes were framed behind glass in the living room. When I asked Dad to drive me to a tournament, he shrugged and said, "Your mom already has Hannah's recital. You're strong, Em. You'll figure it out." I did figure it out. I walked, took buses, stayed late with teachers until someone's parent offered me a ride. Meanwhile, Hannah always had a front-row audience, flowers in her arms, applause like oxygen. I remembered the FAFSA forms stacked on our kitchen table years later. Dad sat in his recliner, eyes fixed on the Weather Channel, while Mom flipped through Hannah's college brochures. I filled out my own applications, found scholarships, and mailed the forms without help. When Hannah panicked the night of her essay deadline, drunk in someone's back seat, she called me. "Em, can you fix it?" she slurred. I stayed up until 3 in the morning writing for her. She got in. They threw her a party. I never got a party. I think of those nights whenever I hear my mother say Hannah's always had such a delicate temperament. It was her justification for everything. For missing my debate tournaments. For forgetting my birthdays. For never visiting me in Los Angeles while they drove 3 times to see Hannah at Texas State. When I graduated from UCLA, they showed up late. Mom hugged me briefly. Dad handed me a card with a $20 bill inside. "We're proud of you," he said, then asked if we could leave early to avoid traffic. I smiled, nodded, and tucked that tiny card into my purse like it mattered. But that card came back to me now, years later, as I stared at Hannah's bridal photos online. My parents hadn't just forgotten to include me. They had chosen not to. I thought about Thanksgiving dinners where I brought expensive bottles of wine from California, only to watch them praise Hannah's homemade pie as if it were a masterpiece. I thought about wiring Hannah money when she broke her lease, or covering the copay when Mom had knee surgery. Every time I told myself I was the responsible one, the strong one, the one who could handle herself. But the truth was simpler. I was convenient. And when Hannah's fiancé turned out to be Andrew Whitmore of the Whitmore Hotel fortune, they no longer needed me to play that role. The night I discovered the guest list, my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Alyssa Rage. "Drinks, sushi, both." She didn't wait for me to answer, just sent the name of our favorite spot in Little Italy. By the time I arrived, she was already 2 sake bombs in lipstick-smudged hair, wild from the wind. "Tell me everything," she demanded, waving me into the booth. I slid in, the weight of the day still heavy on my shoulders. "They didn't invite me," I said flatly. "My own sister's wedding. My parents knew and they never told me. I had to find out on Instagram." Alyssa's eyes widened. "That's not passive-aggressive. That's surgical." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know what this really is, right? What, you're too successful. They can't control you anymore. You're the inconvenient truth." I laughed bitterly. "You've been hanging out with too many screenwriters. Facts are facts, babe. Look at you. LA condo, 6-figure salary, dating Nolan Graves. The Nolan Graves, youngest billionaire in real estate. And Hannah, she's still the family's fragile princess. If she marries Whitmore, she finally gets her crown. You don't fit the story." Her words sliced through me sharper than I expected. Not because they weren't true, but because they were. "When's the wedding?" she asked. "July. That's all I know." She tapped her phone, scrolling. "Wait. Andrew Whitmore's mom is Eleanor Whitmore, right? Old Dallas money hotel chain matriarch." I nodded. "Well, if Hannah wants that woman's approval, she'll rewrite her entire life to look spotless. And spotless means no complicated older sister hanging around." I sat back, staring at the melting ice in my glass. "So they just erase me." "They try," Alyssa said softly, "but you're not erasable." That night when I got home, I opened my laptop. Nolan's calendar glowed back at me, meetings in New York the same week as Hannah's wedding. He'd asked me to come with him. At the time I'd said, maybe. Now, staring at the empty closet where my cocktail dress hung, I felt the shape of a choice forming. I didn't need their invitation. I didn't need their table. I had been knocking on locked doors my whole life. Maybe it was time to stop. I closed the laptop, slid into bed, and stared at the ceiling until the city outside fell quiet. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like possibility. Nolan didn't ask questions when I told him I was coming with him to New York. He simply looked up from his tablet, eyes calm but searching, and gave me a small smile. "Good," he said. "I was hoping you'd say yes." There was no interrogation, no need to dig into the family drama simmering beneath my skin. He just accepted my decision as if it had been inevitable all along. We landed at JFK on a humid Thursday morning in June. The air clung to my neck like a second skin as the car wound through traffic, skyscrapers stabbing into the haze. Manhattan had always lived in my imagination as a symbol of freedom. When I was 19, scribbling in notebooks at UCLA, I dreamed of one day working here. Now it felt less like an escape and more like a reminder of who I could be without chains. The Mercer suite was minimalist, an impossibly elegant pale wood, and clean lines, too many pillows stacked across the bed. Nolan slipped into a conference call, almost immediately his voice low and steady in the next room, while I wandered the streets of Soho alone. Prince Street smelled of espresso and pavement after rain. I ducked into a bookstore, ran my fingers along spines without really seeing them, grateful for the anonymity New York always offered. That night we had reservations in Tribeca, the kind of restaurant that didn't list prices where menus read like poetry. I wore the black sheath dress I'd packed at the last minute, my lips painted a shade I privately called certainty. But I could barely taste the food. My thoughts swirled with Hannah's gown, my mother's cold email, the hollow pit where family should have been. "You're quiet," Nolan said over candlelight. "Just tired," I murmured, pushing risotto around my plate. "From work?" he asked gently. "From pretending things don't bother me." He didn't press. He just nodded, ordered dessert neither of us ate, and took my hand under the table with a quiet firmness that steadied me more than words could. Back at the hotel, I stood at the window with a glass of water, staring at the skyline like it owed me an explanation. Nolan leaned in the doorway, sleeves rolled, tie gone. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I turned slowly. "Hannah's getting married in July." He blinked once. "You just found out on Instagram," I said flatly. His jaw tightened, but he let me continue. "They didn't tell me. They didn't invite me. I had to see it through other people's posts, like a stranger." Nolan stepped forward, his presence solid, anchoring. "I'm sorry," he said simply. I nodded, not expecting him to fix it. "It's not even about the wedding, it's about everything before it. Years of being the fixer, the one who paid tuition, the one who showed up. And now I'm disposable. You're not disposable. They think I am. I'm dangerous because I remember the truth. Because I was the safety net and now I'm the embarrassment." Nolan crossed the room, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "You were never an embarrassment. You've spent your whole life twisting yourself into shapes to be accepted by people who refuse to see you. Maybe it's time you stop doing that." The words cut through me like light through glass. "Maybe," I whispered. He reached for my hand, not dramatic, just grounding. "I want something with you, Emma. Something where you don't have to prove yourself every damn day." Would you want a life where you never have to ask to be seen? It wasn't a proposal, not in the traditional sense. No ring, no roses, no staged perfection. Just a question, raw and steady. I didn't need to think. Yes. One word, and something unspoken between us finally exhaled. We didn't toast. We didn't post a photo. He just kissed my forehead, turned off the light, and let me stand a little longer by the window. The city below looked the same, but I didn't. For the first time, I wasn't on the outside waiting to be invited in. I had walked through a door that was already open. The next morning, while Nolan slipped into meetings across Midtown, I sat in a cafe on Lafayette with my laptop open. Work emails flooded in, numbers, forecasts, presentation decks stacked like walls. But the words blurred, meaningless. My pulse beat to a different rhythm. I closed the laptop, opened a blank email and typed, "Effective immediately, I will be stepping away from my position at Westmont Capital. No return date, no long explanation. Just the truth I had been carrying too much for too long." I hit send and sat back. My lungs felt fuller than they had in years. When Nolan returned that afternoon, I was curled on the hotel sofa with a book I wasn't reading. He glanced at me, saw the strange calm on my face, and asked, "What did you do? I quit." He smiled faintly, not surprised. Good. That evening we walked through Soho under strings of lights, the city buzzing around us. For once, I wasn't looking for approval in strangers' eyes. I was just there with him, building something new. The choice had already been made. I would not be begging for a seat at a table where I was never welcome. I would be writing my own story on my own terms. And I realized, as Nolan laced his fingers with mine, that maybe revenge wasn't about fighting back. Maybe it was about refusing to disappear. Saturday evening, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen reheating leftover pasta when Nolan leaned against the doorway, phone in hand, eyes lit with quiet mischief. "Pack light," he said simply. I turned, spatula still in hand. For what? He flipped the screen toward me. A reservation, flights, a hotel confirmation with whitewashed walls and blue-domed rooftops. Santorini. My jaw dropped. "You're serious?" He shrugged, casual, as if he'd booked a weekend in Palm Springs. 10 days. Just us. No laptops, no noise. You need sunlight and distance, Emma. I already called the villa. Infinity pool, terrace, sea view. We leave Friday. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened. "You planned this behind my back." "Planned," he corrected, "for the day you finally stopped begging your family for scraps." I laughed, incredulous, then shook my head. "You're impossible." "Impossibly right," he said, kissing me once before walking away like the matter was settled. The next day, I told Alyssa over lattes at Common Ground Cafe. She nearly shrieked, causing the barista to spill foam across the counter. "Santorini, oh my God, Emma, we are not playing small anymore." She reached into her oversized tote and pulled out a long black bag, dramatic as a magician. "I've been saving this for you." I frowned. "What is it, your armor?" she said, unzipping the bag with a flourish. Inside shimmered crimson silk bias, cut backless, unapologetic. "Taylor Esme, handmade, one of one. You're wearing this on that island, no arguments." I touched the fabric like it was wholly smooth and heavy, alive with possibility. "Alyssa, I can't." "You can," she snapped. "And you will. For once in your life, don't try to blend in. Don't hide. This isn't about revenge. It's about presence. Show up so fully they choke on the silence you left behind." Her words lodged in my chest. I hugged her tighter than I meant to. The week before departure blurred. I set my work phone to airplane mode, paid the last of Hannah's old medical bill that still sat in my name, and cleared my schedule without apologies. Each act felt like cutting another invisible cord that had bound me to a family that never saw me. By Friday, Nolan and I boarded the flight, business class, side by side. He carried only a backpack and a paperback novel, while I had one carefully packed suitcase. At JFK, I still felt restless, checking my phone too often. Somewhere in Dallas, final fittings and centerpieces were happening while my own absence hummed like a scandal, waiting to be noticed. But once the plane lifted into the sky, and the ocean stretched endless below, something in me unclenched. We landed in Athens, then ferried to Santorini. The island was bluer than photographs, deeper, its cliffs carved like gods had left fingerprints in stone. Our villa in Oya perched above the sea, whitewashed walls, glowing against cobalt shutters, a terrace that seemed to hang over eternity. I stood there the first evening, barefoot on the balcony, wind tangling my hair, salt heavy in the air. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. The second night, I slipped into the crimson dress Alyssa had pressed into my arms. No makeup, just gold hoops and bare skin. Nolan turned from the terrace railing when he saw me, his glass stilled in his hand. "You look like closure, and beginning at once," he whispered. He had arranged for a local photographer, discreet, kind, to capture us. As we laughed on the balcony, walked barefoot across stone, leaned against each other with the sea stretching behind us. The photos weren't posed, just moments. a woman no longer begging to be seen. Later, Nolan poured champagne and toasted to nothing specific. We clinked glasses beneath a sky so vast it silenced every old wound. I thought about Hannah then, about the reception halls being decorated in Dallas, about my mother adjusting pearls in the mirror. They had erased me, but here I was, existing louder in silence than I ever had at their table. The next morning I woke to gulls calling across the cliffs, the sea breathing against the shore below. I padded onto the terrace barefoot, coffee in hand, crimson dress drying on the chair from where I'd hung it after midnight. My phone buzzed with notifications. I had posted a single photo the night before me, at the bow of a boat, hair tangled back, bare sea, endless behind me. The caption, "Not all families are worth RSVPing for." I hadn't expected much, but the post had spread. Old classmates, colleagues, even distant cousins had liked, shared, commented. Words like strength, power, freedom. Nolan came out an hour later with a box of honey pastries he'd fetched from town. "You've gone viral," he teased. I laughed, half disbelieving, half exhilarated. "All I did was live my life." "Exactly," he said, handing me a pastry. "That's what terrifies them." I bit into flaky sweetness, sea air whipping my hair, and realized he was right. My parents, Hannah, all of them, they had built their story on control. But control only works if the silence stays silent. I wasn't silent anymore. And for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt rewritten. The wind tangled my hair as the yacht cut across the Aegean, the sea glittering like shards of glass beneath the afternoon sunday. Nolan stood a few feet behind me, sunglasses shading his eyes, his hand resting lazily on the railing, as if he had always belonged here. A local captain named Stavros handled the wheel, quiet and steady, while I stood at the bow in Alyssa's crimson dress, the fabric whipping around my legs like fire against the pale blue horizon. For a long time I didn't move. I let the salt sting my lips, the spray cool my skin. The silence of the open water wrapped around me like armor. On land I was the daughter left off a guest list, the sister erased. Out here I was something else entirely, someone no one could banish. "Turn around," Nolan called over the rush of wind. I glanced back. He had his phone raised, capturing me against the endless horizon. I rolled my eyes but laughed, walking back toward him. "Let me see." He showed me the screen. The photo startled me. My back to the camera, shoulders bare, hair lifted by the wind, the red dress cutting like a flame through the pale ocean. I didn't look like someone waiting for approval. I looked like a woman who had finally stepped into her own name. "Post it," Nolan said softly. I hesitated, then opened Instagram. The caption formed easily. "Not all families are worth RSVPing for." My finger hovered over share. Then, without overthinking, I tapped it. By the time we docked at a hidden cove, the photo was already buzzing with likes. We dove into the water, cold at first, then exhilarating. My body moved without tension for the first time in years, arms slicing through turquoise clarity, sunlight pouring down like absolution. We floated side by side, fingers brushing, laughter carried away by the waves. When we climbed back aboard, towels wrapped tight, Nolan handed me a glass of white wine. "You don't realize it yet, but you've just lit a fuse." I sipped, the crisp taste cutting through salt on my tongue. I wasn't trying to start a fire. You don't have to. Some matches ignite just by existing. That evening back at the villa, I showered and slipped into linen. Nolan uncorked another bottle of wine while I absently scrolled my phone. Notifications had exploded. Dozens of comments, messages, shares. People I hadn't heard from in years resurfaced, cousins, college friends, even an old colleague from Los Angeles. "You look incredible. Didn't know things were bad with your family. Stay strong. Families can be toxic too." I set the phone down, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I had written my family out with 12 words, and strangers understood me more than my parents ever had. Later that night, lying in bed with the windows open to the sea breeze, Nolan traced circles on my wrist. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Only that I waited this long to stop playing small," I whispered. He kissed the inside of my hand. Then don't ever go back. The next morning the consequences arrived. A message from Aunt Clara blinked on my screen. Honey, I don't know what's happening, but I just want you to know, I'm thinking of you. No one deserves to be left out like that. Another from my cousin Rachel, I had no idea you weren't invited. That's so wrong. You've always done everything for Hannah. And then the one that stopped me cold, a DM from Harper Whitmore, the niece of Eleanor Whitmore, Andrew's mother. Thought you'd want to see this, she wrote, attaching a screenshot of my post. Beneath it was a private comment thread, tagged to Eleanor herself. Isn't this the sister of the bride? Why wasn't she invited? I stared at the screen, heart racing. Nolan leaned over, reading silently. He met my eyes steady. It begins, he murmured. I set the phone down, palms slick. I didn't mean Emma, he interrupted, voice low but certain. Stop apologizing for being the truth. Somewhere in Dallas, Hannah was probably finalizing her seating chart, fussing over flowers, rehearsing vows she hoped would sound effortless. But her perfect picture had a crack now, one she couldn't patch with lace or money. Silence didn't mean absence anymore. It meant witness. That afternoon we walked through Oya narrow streets smelling of grilled fish and citrus. Tourists haggled over jewelry, children licked dripping gelato cones, the world oblivious to the storm brewing across the ocean. I bought a pair of gold hoop earrings, simple and strong, and wore them immediately. Back at the villa, Nolan snapped another photo of me leaning against the terrace wall, sea glowing behind me. I didn't post it. I didn't need to. The first one was still burning across timelines and whispers. By evening I received another message, this one from Camille, an old college friend of Hannah's who had always hovered like a shadow at family events. She's unraveling, Camille wrote. Just thought you should know. I exhaled, slow and steady. For years I had feared being the one to fall apart, the one to break under pressure. But it wasn't me unraveling this time. It was the image Hannah had curated for so long, the delicate favorite, the chosen one, the flawless bride. It turned out that image was thinner than we all thought. As night settled over the island, Nolan poured the last of the wine. We sat on the terrace in silence, watching the sea darken into infinity. My phone buzzed again and again from the table inside. I let it. Do you hear that? Nolan asked softly. Hear what the sound of them losing control. The waves crashed against the cliffs below, steady and timeless. I smiled faintly. It almost sounds like applause. In Dallas, the Whitmore estate pulsed with preparations, the mansion lit up for rehearsals and luncheons, the kind of fairy tale chaos Hannah had always craved. But behind the polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, whispers had begun to weave through every room. Eleanor Whitmore heard them first, quiet comments from guests about a photograph circulating online. A woman in a red silk dress standing at the bow of a yacht, the sea spilling endless behind her. The caption, "Not all families are worth RSVPing for." Eleanor sat in her private study, the photo printed out neatly on her desk. She studied it as if it were a stock portfolio. Grace, presence, power without apology, and the name beneath it, Emma Carter. Why didn't anyone tell me about her? She asked, voice clipped. Her assistant Karen shifted uneasily. We were told she was estranged, that the family wasn't in touch. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Estranged is one thing, viral is another. Get me her file, education, career, property, everything. By the afternoon, a thick folder landed on her desk. She flipped through it quickly. UCLA graduate. Real estate investment strategist in San Diego. Former director at Westmont Capital. Financially independent, successful, credible. She paused at one page, eyebrows lifting, featured speaker at a Women in Business Summit in Los Angeles. Then she opened Hannah's file. Texas State University average GPA, internships padded with exaggerated claims. Eleanor frowned. She remembered signing Hannah's onboarding forms 2 years ago, when she had interned briefly with the Whitmore Group. The resume had listed a transfer from Greystone College in New York. Something had nagged at her then, but she had ignored it. Now curiosity pulled her back. Karen, she said sharply, pull records for Greystone College. 10 minutes later, Karen returned pale. There's no such institution. At least not accredited. Eleanor closed the folder slowly. A lie. A fabricated background her son's fiancé had slid under her nose, banking on charm to cover the cracks. That evening, when Andrew came home, Eleanor was waiting in the conservatory with mint tea and the file stacked beside her. Sit, she said. He obeyed, still loosening his tie from a long day. What's going on? Tell me what you know about Hannah's family. Andrew frowned. She said she was close with her mom, distant from her dad. Said her sister cut ties years ago. Eleanor tapped the photo on the table. This sister, the one on every feed in Dallas right now. The one described as brilliant, successful, independent. Andrew stared. Recognition flickered. That's Emma. Hannah always made her sound unstable. She's not unstable, Eleanor said evenly. She's dangerous. Because she tells the truth. Andrew ran a hand through his hair. Hannah said she didn't invite her to keep drama away. That Emma, well, that she was jealous. Eleanor slid the false resume across the table. Jealous or inconvenient? Because it looks to me like Hannah lied about her education, her background, even her history with my company. Andrew scanned the paper, lips tightening. She said she transferred. I never thought to check. You should, Eleanor said coolly. Before you bind this family to hers? He dropped the paper on the table. For the first time, he didn't look like a groom-to-be. He looked like a man staring down a crack in the foundation. Meanwhile, in Santorini, I woke to the sound of seagulls and the faint buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. Sunlight spilled across the sheets, warming my bare shoulders. Nolan stirred beside me but didn't wake. I reached for the phone, squinting against the brightness. A message blinked on the screen from my cousin Marcus' mom. Says the Whitmores are digging into Hannah's background. They found something. Brace yourself. I sat up, heart hammering. The sea stretched endless outside the window, serene, oblivious. I typed back, I'm not surprised. Minutes later, another message came, this one from Camille, Hannah's old friend. She's unraveling. Screaming at your mom, crying to Andrew. Says you're trying to ruin her. But honestly, she did this to herself. I set the phone down, staring at the waves. For years I had been the one unraveling in silence, patched together by sheer will. Now Hannah's carefully curated porcelain surface was cracking, and all I had done was step aside. By mid-morning, tabloids in Dallas were already buzzing, questions raised about bride-to-be's past, as sister's viral post sparks curiosity. The words felt surreal, like fiction spun out of my absence. Nolan joined me on the terrace with coffee. Bad news, he asked, noticing the tension in my grip. Not bad, just inevitable, I whispered. He studied me. Does it feel like revenge? Yet I shook my head. It feels like truth. And maybe that's worse for them. Back in Dallas, Hannah sat in her bridal suite, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her phone buzzing nonstop. Andrew had barely spoken to her since his conversation with Eleanor. Her bridesmaids avoided her eyes. Every time she scrolled another article, another photo of me in the red dress appeared. She finally called my phone. The screen lit up with her name. I watched it buzz across the table, vibrating against the wood. Nolan raised an eyebrow. Are you going to answer? I shook my head. Not yet. The call went to voicemail. Then another. And another. By the time the sun dipped below the cliffs, I had counted 18 missed calls from Hannah, 12 from my mother, 9 from my father. 99 in total, the number flashing like an accusation. But instead of panic, I felt calm. Because for the first time, their desperation wasn't my responsibility. It was their reckoning. The ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel gleamed like a movie set, chandeliers blazing over rows of white-draped tables, crystal glasses aligned with surgical precision. Yet beneath the shine, tension rippled like static. Guests clutched their champagne flutes a little tighter, leaned in closer to whisper, eyes darting toward the bride's suite where Hannah was locked away. The question passed from mouth to mouth, did you see the sisters' post? Why wasn't she invited? In the bridal suite, Hannah sat rigid in her chair, makeup half finished, her reflection fractured in the vanity mirror. Her phone buzzed non-stop on the table beside her, bouquet notifications stacking faster than she could clear them. Headlines, screenshots, comments. And always the same photo, me on a yacht, the red silk dress cutting across the sea like a declaration she couldn't outshine. Her maid of honor, a college friend with nervous eyes, finally said what everyone else was thinking. Maybe you should call her, just talk. Hannah's hands trembled. She did this to me on purpose. She wanted to humiliate me. No, the friend whispered carefully. She didn't say a word about you, that's the problem. Meanwhile, in Santorini, I sipped cappuccino at a cafe overlooking the caldera. The air smelled of honey and sea salt, the world moving at an entirely different rhythm than Dallas. Nolan returned from the ferry office with tickets in hand. Paros tomorrow, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I nodded, but my phone buzzed again. Another message from my cousin, Elise. The Whitmores pulled the reception. Eleanor shut it down this morning. Just a ceremony now. Hannah's losing it. I set the phone face down, exhaling. Nolan studied me. You don't have to read them, you know. I know, I said. But it feels like watching a house collapse. I can't look away. Back at the Whitmore estate, Eleanor was orchestrating the dismantling of Hannah's perfect day with the same precision she brought to boardrooms. Cancel the reception, she instructed calmly. Family only. Keep it quiet, no spectacle. Vendors packed up floral walls, caterers wheeled away silver trays, musicians slipped out with instruments unplayed. Hannah burst into the conservatory when she realized, you can't do this. It's my wedding. Eleanor didn't flinch. It's my family's reputation, and reputation comes first. Andrew stood off to the side, his tie-loose expression unreadable. When Hannah turned to him for support, he avoided her gaze. Andrew, she begged, tell her, this isn't fair. He finally spoke, voice flat. I don't even know who you are anymore. Hannah's knees nearly buckled. By afternoon, the whispers among guests turned into open conversations. An aunt leaned toward her husband, murmuring, why would they erase Emma? She's the accomplished one. A cousin added, I saw the article. The Whitmores must be furious. The fairy tale Hannah had built began to crumble, not from my hand, but from the weight of her own lies. I sat on the terrace that evening, Santorini painted in gold and violet, while Nolan poured wine into long-stemmed glasses. He raised his to me, to letting the truth do the work. I clinked his glass, my laugh quiet. I didn't even plan this. You didn't have to. Karma was waiting. I checked my phone one last time. 99 missed calls. My mother crying in voicemails, my father demanding explanations, Hannah's voice breaking into sobs. I didn't answer any of them. I set the phone aside, the waves below, echoing like applause. Back in Dallas, the ceremony limped forward in a small chapel. No floral arch, no music, but a simple piano, no banquet waiting after. Hannah walked down the aisle with her smile trembling, mascara smudged at the corners. Andrew barely looked at her. When the vows came, she stumbled not over the words themselves, but over the silence between them. No one clapped when they kissed. In that moment, even from across an ocean, I felt it. The collapse of the story they had written without me, and the beginning of the one I had chosen instead. I woke to the soft hush of waves against the cliff's sunlight, pooling across the villa's whitewashed walls. My phone abandoned on the nightstand, pulsed with light like a heartbeat I didn't want to claim. 99 missed calls still glared back at me when I finally reached for it. Most were from my mother. A handful from my father. Nearly 24 from Hannah. Each voicemail told its own story, pleading, bargaining, demanding, but I didn't press play. Silence was my answer. Nolan stirred beside me, hair mussed, voice rough with sleep. More calls, I nodded. They think I'll crack if they just keep ringing. Will you? I set the phone down face first against the wood. No, not this time. The truth was my silence had become its own weapon. Every unanswered call said more than 1,000 shouted confrontations. For years I had filled the void with apologies, explanations, peace offerings. Now I let the void speak for me. By mid-morning, a new message appeared, this time from Andrew himself. "Emma, I need to understand. Please just tell me your side." His voice, caught in a short voicemail, was hollow, uncertain. I pictured him in his family's mansion, pacing the marble halls, wondering if the woman he was about to marry was built on half-truths. I didn't reply. In Dallas, Eleanor Whitmore reviewed the situation like she might a failing merger. "The sister won't speak," she told her assistant. "That silence speaks louder than anything Hannah could spin." She had already ordered background checks, unearthed debts, uncovered the fabricated Greystone College. Now she waited, watching as Hannah unraveled. Hannah stormed through the bridal suite, pacing in her silk robe, hair undone. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she typed another frantic message to me. "Please, I'm begging you, stop this. You're destroying me." But I hadn't done anything except breathe. Her bridesmaids whispered in corners, scrolling through the viral photo of me in the crimson dress, the caption etched like a scar across their screens. "Not all families are worth RSVPing for." The post had escaped social media and slipped into glossy magazines. A lifestyle blog had featured it under the headline, "The Woman Who Chose Freedom Over Family Approval." My absence had become the story. That evening, Nolan and I dined under the stars on the yacht, jazz floating from a small speaker, the sea calm as glass. He lifted his glass of champagne, eyes glinting. "They're drowning in appearances," he said, "and you're finally breathing." I smiled faintly. For the first time, I don't feel guilty for it. The world around us hummed with peace. Yet my phone kept buzzing inside, desperate voices demanding I explain myself, defend myself, save them from the collapse of their own making. When I checked it later, the tally had grown 99 missed calls. The number itself became surreal, almost symbolic. My family's entire world crumbling, and all I had done was refuse to pick up. Across the ocean, the backlash sharpened. Hannah's vendors whispered about canceled checks, bridesmaids quietly left her group chat, and the Whitmore family's reputation trembled under scrutiny. Andrew avoided her eyes, and even Eleanor's polite composure cracked. The fairy tale had rotted from within, and no one could stop the spread. Camille, Hannah's college friend, texted me again late that night. "She thinks you planned this. She's saying you wanted to ruin her wedding. But everyone can see she did it to herself." I read it twice, then set the phone down. Outside, the sea breathed steady and eternal, unconcerned with human wreckage. Nolan wrapped an arm around me on the terrace, his voice low. "Do you hear it?" I tilted my head, listening to the waves. The sound of control slipping from their hands. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze lift the weight off my shoulders. For once, the chaos wasn't mine to manage. It was theirs, and I had no intention of picking up. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses and polished silver, though most of the arrangements had already been dragged away. Eleanor Whitmore arrived at 8 sharp, dressed in navy heels, clicking across the marble floor like a gavel against wood. She didn't greet the wedding planner. She didn't ask about last-minute details. She simply looked at the gilded stage set for 200 guests and said, "Shut it down." The planner blinked, throat bobbing. "Excuse me, the reception, the banquet, the 6-tier cake, cancel it all, family only." By 9:30, servers were folding tablecloths, florists boxed up white hydrangeas, and musicians carried their instruments out without playing a note. Guests received hurried emails blaming unexpected circumstances. The fairy tale celebration shrank to a hollow ceremony. Upstairs, Hannah sat in her bridal suite robe, slipping from her shoulders, mascara half done. She scrolled frantically through messages, bridesmaids asking if rumors were true, vendors demanding final payment, her mother Marilyn sending one fragile line, "It's Joanna's call, honey. We don't have the money to cover this." She dialed, Andrew, voice sharp. "Why aren't you stopping her?" On the other end, his pause was longer than the Atlantic. "Maybe she has her reasons." Hannah's breath hitched. You're supposed to defend me. I'm tired of defending things that don't hold. His tone was quiet, steady, scarier than shouting. Hannah hurled her phone onto the velvet bench, the sound echoing through the suite like a gavel. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, curls pinned veil, waiting lips trembling, the perfect bride cracking before she even reached the aisle. Meanwhile, in Santorini, I sat barefoot on the yacht's deck, sipping chilled wine as the sea shifted into liquid gold. Nolan stretched beside me, sunglasses hiding a smile. Did you see the news? I shook my head. He handed me his phone. The headline blazed across a glossy lifestyle site, Exiled Sisters Silence Crashes Whitmore Wedding. Beneath it, my photo at the bow, in that crimson dress, hair wild in the wind. The caption I'd written, "Not all families are worth RSVPing for," quoted like scripture. I set the phone down, heart steady. It wasn't revenge. I just lived. Sometimes living is the best revenge. Nolan's words melted into the hum of the waves. Back in Tennessee, guests whispered as the ceremony was stripped to its bones. No floral arch, no quartet, no champagne toast. Just Hannah, heavy-lidded in her gown, walking toward Andrew with cameras forbidden and silence pressed thick around them. Vows stumbled not because the words were hard, but because truth was harder. In the back row, Marilyn dabbed at her eyes, while my father sat stone still. Both had spent decades rehearsing the narrative of the delicate daughter and the strong one who didn't need anything. Now their favorite story had collapsed in front of a crowd too small to hide it. After the truncated ceremony, Hannah cornered her mother. "Do something, fix this." Marilyn shook her head, voice brittle. "I told you not to erase your sister. Eleanor doesn't tolerate liars." Hannah's face blanched as if hearing her own mother admitted aloud tore the last thread. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed on the yacht with updates from Sophia and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. "We had no idea they banned you. It's disgusting." Another text, "The wedding is falling apart. She's unraveling." I put the phone face down against the teak table, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sea didn't care, the wind didn't care. For the first time in my life, neither did I. Later that evening, as candles flickered in a gutted reception hall, Hannah sat alone in her gown, bouquet wilting beside her. Guests had trickled out. Andrew had vanished with his mother. Her phone lit up with headline screenshots, and the one image she couldn't escape me in crimson on the bow of a yacht, captioned with the words she hated most. "When you erase people, they don't disappear. They evolve." She pressed trembling hands against her face and whispered into the empty room she wasn't supposed to matter. But the truth was already louder than her voice could ever be. The rain came without warning that morning, soft and steady, as if the sky itself wanted to rinse away the debris of everything that had burned. I stood at the window of my Los Angeles apartment, coffee in hand, watching the droplets stream down like threads, trying to stitch something back together. But I knew better. Some fabrics weren't meant to be repaired. On the counter behind me, my phone buzzed non-stop. Articles, mentions, reposts. The photo of me on the yacht had gone further than I ever intended. Picked up by a national magazine, then by women's blogs across the country. The caption had been turned into a rallying cry. "Not all families are worth RSVPing for." My inbox filled with messages from strangers, women who had been cut from inheritances, excluded from weddings, or dismissed at holiday dinners. "I thought I was alone until I saw your story. My parents chose my brother too. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." I cried reading this. "I'm done begging to belong." The words pierced me not with pain but with recognition. I wasn't invisible anymore, not because my family finally noticed me, but because women who knew this same ache were finally speaking too. I turned off notifications, poured a second cup of coffee, and walked into the office I'd begun shaping with my own hands. The white walls were bare except for a single framed sentence I had written months earlier but never shown anyone. "We help women build what no one thought they could." It was supposed to be aspirational. Now it felt like truth. By noon, I was sitting at my walnut desk reviewing proposals for the mentorship initiative Nolan, and I had been quietly planning. But before I could lose myself in spreadsheets, my assistant forwarded an email. Subject line, meeting request, Eleanor Whitmore. I read it twice. No apologies, no explanations. Just one line, I'll be in Los Angeles Wednesday. If you're available, I'd like to talk. The old me, the one who begged for crumbs of acknowledgement, would have dropped everything. The new me let the email sit for 3 hours before replying Wednesday at 2. My office. When the day came, I wore a navy suit and a crisp blouse. No jewelry except a plain gold band my grandmother once gave me. I wanted to meet her as myself. Not the girl in the red dress, not the viral symbol, but Natalie flesh and bone unbending. At exactly 1:59 she arrived. Tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal blazer that fit like armor. Her handshake was firm, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Of course, we Saturday." The silence stretched between us, heavy but not hostile. She didn't touch the water I poured. Finally, she laid a folded printout on the desk. It was the magazine's spread, my photo on the cover, the caption "Grace Redefined." "They got it wrong," she said flatly. I tilted my head. "Oh, this wasn't Grace Redefined. It was Grace Reclaimed." Her words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the air between us. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She rose, tucking her chair back with military precision. "I didn't come to apologize," she said. "I came because I may have misjudged the picture. And now I want to understand the frame." And just like that, she left, heels clicking down the hallway, leaving me in the quiet hum of my own office. That night, Nolan found me still sitting at the desk long after the sun had set. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I think so." I leaned back, staring at the dark ceiling. "She sees me now." He placed his hands on my shoulders, grounding me. "She's not the only one. The world sees you, Nat. More importantly, you see yourself." The next morning, as I scrolled through my phone over breakfast, another message lit up my screen. This time, it wasn't from Eleanor. It was from Hannah. No paragraphs, no justifications, just a single photo. A newborn, pink and fragile, wrapped in hospital linens. Underneath, 5 words. "Do you want to meet her?" I froze. My coffee cooled between my hands. The tug inside me was immediate, instinctual, the kind of pull no amount of betrayal can erase. For a moment, I saw us again as little girls sharing a bedroom in that creaky Virginia house, whispering secrets into the dark. But then, the silence of the years came rushing back, the birthdays, forgotten, the inheritance I was never, written into the way she let Mom and Dad erase me, like I had never mattered. Nolan found me at the window, phone still in hand. "What is it?" "Hannah had her baby," I whispered. "And she asked if I want to meet her." His eyes searched mine. "What do you feel?" I exhaled slowly. "Nothing. And that's how I know I'm finally free." I set the phone down on the counter screen, dimming as if it too understood. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their story anymore. I was writing my own. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky stretched wide and clear, over the city rinsed of every storm. And I knew whatever came next, it would be on my terms. The rain came without warning that morning, soft and steady, as if the sky itself wanted to rinse away the debris of everything that had burned. I stood at the window of my Los Angeles apartment, coffee in hand, watching the droplets stream down like threads, trying to stitch something back together. But I knew better. Some fabrics weren't meant to be repaired. On the counter behind me, my phone buzzed nonstop. Articles, mentions, reposts. The photo of me on the yacht had gone further than I ever intended, picked up by a national magazine, then by women's blogs across the country. The caption had been turned into a rallying cry. "Not all families are worth RSVPing for." My inbox filled with messages from strangers, women who had been cut from inheritances, excluded from weddings, or dismissed at holiday dinners. I thought I was alone until I saw your story. My parents chose my brother too. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." I cried reading this. "I'm done begging to belong. The words pierced me not with pain, but with recognition. I wasn't invisible anymore, not because my family finally noticed me, but because women who knew this same ache were finally speaking too. I turned off notifications, poured a second cup of coffee, and walked into the office I'd begun shaping with my own hands. The white walls were bare, except for a single framed sentence I had written months earlier, but never shown anyone. We help women build what no one thought they could. It was supposed to be aspirational. Now it felt like truth. By noon, I was sitting at my walnut desk reviewing proposals for the mentorship initiative Nolan and I had been quietly planning. But before I could lose myself in spreadsheets, my assistant forwarded an email. Subject line: Meeting request, Eleanor Whitmore. I read it twice. No apologies, no explanations. Just one line: I'll be in Los Angeles Wednesday. If you're available, I'd like to talk. The old me, the one who begged for crumbs of acknowledgement, would have dropped everything. The new me let the email sit for 3 hours before replying Wednesday at 2. My office. When the day came, I wore a navy suit and a crisp blouse. No jewelry except a plain gold band my grandmother once gave me. I wanted to meet her as myself. Not the girl in the red dress, not the viral symbol, but Natalie flesh and bone unbending. At exactly 1:59 she arrived. Tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal blazer that fit like armor. Her handshake was firm, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Of course, we Saturday." The silence stretched between us, heavy but not hostile. She didn't touch the water I poured. Finally, she laid a folded printout on the desk. It was the magazine, spread my photo on the cover, the caption Grace Redefined. "They got it wrong," she said flatly. I tilted my head. "Oh, this wasn't Grace Redefined, it was Grace Reclaimed." Her words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the air between us. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She rose, tucking her chair back with military precision. "I didn't come to apologize," she said. "I came because I may have misjudged the picture, and now I want to understand the frame." And just like that, she left, heels clicking down the hallway, leaving me in the quiet hum of my own office. That night, Nolan found me still sitting at the desk long after the sun had set. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I think so." I leaned back, staring at the dark ceiling. "She sees me now." He placed his hands on my shoulders, grounding me. "She's not the only one. The world sees you, Nat. More importantly, you see yourself." The next morning, as I scrolled through my phone over breakfast, another message lit up my screen. This time, it wasn't from Eleanor. It was from Hannah. No paragraphs, no justifications, just a single photo. A newborn, pink and fragile, wrapped in hospital linens. Underneath, 5 words: "Do you want to meet her?" I froze. My coffee cooled between my hands. The tug inside me was immediate, instinctual, the kind of pull no amount of betrayal can erase. For a moment, I saw us again as little girls sharing a bedroom in that creaky Virginia house, whispering secrets into the dark. But then, the silence of the years came rushing back, the birthdays forgotten, the inheritance I was never, written into the way she let Mom and Dad erase me like I had never mattered. Nolan found me at the window, phone still in hand. "What is it, Hannah? Had her baby?" I whispered. "And she asked if I want to meet her." His eyes searched mine. "What do you feel?" I exhaled slowly. "Nothing. And that's how I know I'm finally free." I set the phone down on the counter screen, dimming, as if it too understood. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their story anymore. I was writing my own. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky stretched wide and clear over the city, rinsed of every storm, and I knew whatever came next, it would be on my terms. The morning light in Los Angeles filtered through the blinds, warm and honey-colored, as if the world had shifted into a slower rhythm, just for me. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with a tiny crack along the rim, and sat by the window. Outside, the street was alive with joggers' dogs pulling at their leashes and the low hum of delivery trucks. Ordinary life, steady and unshaken. And for the first time, I felt steady with it. By 9, I was already at my new office in Culver City. The space smelled faintly of fresh paint and sandalwood from the candle I lit each morning. Quinn Strategies had started as a dream whispered to myself in the quiet after too many long nights at someone else's company. Now it was a real place, clients walking and women sitting across from me with notebooks and nerves asking if their ideas were worth building. I always told them yes because no one had told me that when I was in their shoes. That day, we launched the first phase of the Women Forward mentorship program. Applications flooded my inbox. Single mothers, daughters of immigrants, women starting over after divorces, 20-somethings with sketches of apps and no idea how to fund them. Each story carried the same heartbeat. I've been overlooked, but I'm ready now. I thought about Hannah, about how many times I had been overlooked too, and realized I no longer needed her or my parents to validate me. My life had shifted into its own orbit. In the afternoon, my assistant poked her head into the office. "Eleanor Whitmore confirmed the next meeting for Friday," she said. I nodded. The old me would have shaken, panicked, wondered what Eleanor wanted, but the woman I was becoming didn't flinch. I was no longer at the edge of someone else's story, I was at the center of mine. That evening, Nolan met me for dinner at a rooftop spot overlooking downtown. The air smelled faintly of citrus and wine. He raised his glass toward me. To the woman who stopped asking for a seat at the table and built her own instead. I laughed, but my throat tightened with quiet pride. To building what lasts. Later at home, I found my phone lighting up again. Messages, articles, even a photo someone had taken of the magazine cover framed in a boutique shop window. My face, that crimson dress, the words "Grace Reclaimed." I stared at it for a long time, then turned off the screen. It no longer made me tremble, it just reminded me of how far I'd come. A week later, Hannah sent another photo. This time her baby was awake, eyes wide, fists curled. The message said only, "She deserves to know you." I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either, I just let it sit there. Maybe one day I'd answer. Maybe not. For now, my silence wasn't absence, it was boundary. The rain returned the next morning, light and cleansing. I sat at my desk reviewing the next wave of applications for Women Forward. The stories stacked high, each one a reminder that invisibility doesn't last forever. Someone always finds the courage to step into the light. And when they do, the whole room changes. To anyone listening now, if you've ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the name left off, the invitation, hear me. You are not forgotten, you are not too late, and you are not small. If someone erased you from their story, it's time to write your own. If my story found you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are in your journey. Share your own story so another woman scrolling through won't feel alone. Like this video if you believe silence can be broken. And if you want to stay with me for more stories of betrayal, resilience, and quiet revenge, turned into freedom, subscribe. We're not done yet. The comeback doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives softly like rain on a city morning, reminding you that survival itself is power. And choosing yourself is the loudest revenge of all.